Go back to India. The words cut through the air like a blade. They weren't whispered, they weren't subtle. They were hurled with arrogance, loud enough for the entire room to hear, designed to wound, designed to belittle. For a heartbeat, time froze. You could almost feel the oxygen leave the hall. All eyes turned to Kash Patel. The man at the center of it all didn't flinch, didn't look away. His face carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories, his family's journey, his years of public service, his quiet loyalty to the country that had given him everything. In that pause, in that silence, his composure spoke louder than any outburst ever could. Around him, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped. Some looked down, ashamed. Others smirked, feeding off the cruelty. A camera light blinked red in the corner, streaming every second of this moment to countless viewers, already clipping it, posting it, spreading it across the digital universe. Within minutes, hashtags would appear, memes, outrage, defiance. But in this room right now, there was only stillness. The kind of silence that makes people lean forward, waiting to see which way history will break. For Caroline Leavitt, the silence was triumph. She wore the smirk of someone who thought she had won, who believed she had reduced an opponent not by ideas, not by reason, but by heritage. Her arrogance filled the gap where decency should have been. For Patel, the silence was something else entirely. It was a gathering storm. Behind his calm eyes was not anger, but resolve. He knew the cameras were rolling. He knew the insult wasn't just about him. It was about every immigrant who had ever been told they didn't belong. Every American who had been asked to prove their loyalty twice over. The audience felt it too. The tension became unbearable. You could almost hear hearts pounding, breaths catching, the collective question building. How would he answer? Would he fire back with rage? Would he let the insult slide? Or would he do something no one expected? Because what Kash Patel did next would not only silence the room, it would send shockwaves across America. The confrontation didn't happen in some quiet corner, away from public view. It unfolded under the blinding lights of a nationally televised forum, a place where words were supposed to clash. Yes, but with ideas, policy, vision, the future of the country. Instead, the nation was served something else, a raw, unfiltered insult that laid bare one of America's oldest and ugliest divides. Caroline Leavitt hadn't just spoken to Kash Patel. She had spoken to millions of Americans who tuned in looking for answers, and instead heard a phrase that has echoed through generations. Go back where you came from. A phrase meant to strip away belonging, to draw a line between who is considered a real American and who is forever treated as a guest. That line wasn't just rhetorical. It ran straight through households across the country. On one side, immigrants and their children, families who had sacrificed, who had built lives, who had contributed quietly and proudly to the American story. On the other, those who believed heritage could be weaponized, who thought patriotism could be reduced to ancestry, who wore exclusion like a badge of honor. Leavitt leaned on that divide, hoping to shrink Patel down, to reduce him to an outsider in front of an audience that would nod along. It was a move meant to humiliate, to flex dominance. After all, she wasn't debating his policies in that moment. She was attacking his existence, and the timing couldn't have been more electric. Immigration had become one of the hottest flashpoints in American politics. Questions of loyalty, of who belongs, of who gets to claim real American identity, were tearing through headlines and households. Every word said in that forum was destined to be clipped, replayed, dissected on cable news and blasted on social feeds. The insult wasn't just personal. It was political dynamite. It was about Patel's skin color, his ancestry, his name. But it was also about the countless families watching at home, nodding or wincing, seeing their own lives reflected in that moment. For every immigrant parent who had worked 3 jobs to put food on the table, for every kid who had been asked in school where they were really from, the insult carried a sting they knew too well. And for every viewer who had cheered at the remark, there was the dangerous thrill of division, the belief that America's greatness could only be protected by exclusion. That pride was a zero-sum game. This wasn't just a debate. It had become a battleground for identity itself. The stakes weren't limited to who scored points on stage. They were about how America saw itself, about whether dignity and service could ever outweigh bigotry and arrogance. In that hall, Levitt smirked as though she had landed the final blow. But the country was holding its breath. They weren't just waiting for Patel's response. They were waiting to see if this was another moment where hate would dominate, or if something else, something stronger, could rise in its place. And what happened next, no one could have scripted. Because Patel's answer wouldn't just change the temperature of that room, it would turn the tables in a way no one expected. To understand the venom behind Caroline Levitt's words, you have to understand who she is and the image she's carefully crafted for herself. Levitt rose quickly in the world of conservative politics. Young, outspoken, unafraid of confrontation, she branded herself as a fighter in a movement that rewarded volume over nuance. To her supporters, she was a breath of fresh air, someone who spoke bluntly without apology, and with the kind of youthful energy that promised to shake up the establishment. To her critics, she was something else entirely, a provocateur who thrived on sound bites, a politician who mistook cruelty for courage. Her career had been marked by a pattern. Whenever a camera turned her way, Levitt knew how to seize it. She would unleash sharp, biting one-liners designed not to illuminate policy, but to humiliate opponents. And the formula worked. Clips of her verbal attacks went viral, drawing cheers from those who reveled in her brazenness. She wore the label of truth-teller like a crown, insisting she was the one saying what others were too afraid to say. But there was a contradiction at the heart of her rise. The so-called truths she hurled rarely held up under scrutiny. They were less about honesty and more about spectacle. She didn't dismantle arguments, she dismantled people. She didn't expose lies, she exploited wounds. In political rallies, she leaned heavily on the same arsenal: dismissive nicknames, mocking tones, personal jabs that drew laughter from a friendly crowd. And each time she walked away with the confidence of someone who believed insults were victory. It was a strategy that kept her relevant in a crowded field. The headlines never stopped coming, yet beneath the polish of her rhetoric, there was an unmistakable arrogance. She carried herself as though untouchable, convinced that being louder made her right, that cruelty was strength. When pressed for substance, she pivoted back to spectacle. When challenged on facts, she shifted to insults. It was her armor, her shield, her sword, all rolled into one. That arrogance became her brand. And with each win, each viral moment, she grew more certain that this strategy was unshakable. She believed that opponents would either crumble under the weight of public humiliation or waste their energy trading barbs on her terms. In both scenarios, she won. So when she turned to Kash Patel that night, her instincts followed the same pattern. She didn't bother debating his record or his service. She didn't try to dismantle his ideas. Instead, she reached for the oldest, cheapest weapon in her arsenal: identity. Go back to India. For Levitt, it was another zinger, another line that would leave her opponent flustered and her base delighted. She smirked as she said it, and in that smirk was the certainty of someone who thought she had cornered her rival. This was supposed to be just another easy takedown. The cameras would capture Patel looking rattled, maybe angry, maybe humiliated. Her clip would circulate by morning, proof that she could put him in his place. But what Levitt didn't realize, what her overconfidence blinded her to, was that not every opponent folds under insult. Not every target reacts the way she expects. And in Patel, she had chosen the wrong man, at the wrong moment, on the wrong stage. Because Patel wasn't just another politician with a fragile ego. He was the son of immigrants who had endured far harsher slights. He was a man whose career had been built on loyalty, discipline, and service in rooms where composure mattered more than volume. He was someone who had been underestimated before, and every time it had only sharpened his resolve. For Levitt, this insult was routine. For Patel, it was an opportunity. For the audience, it was a moment that revealed everything about her and everything about him, and while she sat back, basking in the arrogance of a line she thought had landed, she had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that her smirk, her insult, her confidence, would become the very things that unraveled her. Because for Caroline Levitt, this was supposed to be another easy takedown. Instead, it became her undoing. To understand the quiet strength in Kash Patel's eyes that night, you have to understand where he came from. His story wasn't written in privilege or shortcuts. It was carved out of sacrifice, discipline, and an unwavering belief that America had room for families like his. Patel's parents immigrated to the United States with little more than hope in their pockets. They worked long hours in jobs that were often invisible, unglamorous but vital. Their lives were a testament to grit, the kind of grind that never makes headlines, but sustains the backbone of a nation. For them, the American dream wasn't about luxury. It was about dignity. It was about giving their children opportunities they had never known. Cash grew up in that world of sacrifice. He saw the tired hands of his parents. He watched them save every dollar, endure every setback, and still manage to stand tall. He knew from an early age that he carried more than his own ambitions. He carried their sacrifices, their faith, their belief that this country could deliver fairness if you worked hard enough. That weight didn't burden him. It shaped him. Education became his weapon. Discipline became his shield. While others coasted, Cash studied harder, pushed further, determined to honor the journey that had brought him here. Law became his calling, not just as a profession, but as a way to safeguard the very ideals his family had invested their lives in. He wasn't chasing power. He was chasing service, a way to give back to the nation that had taken his family in, and service defined his path. Patel took on roles that demanded loyalty and composure under pressure. He advised, investigated, and navigated the treacherous halls of government, always with a steady hand. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was often the most prepared. He learned that true strength wasn't in volume or arrogance. It was in quiet resolve, in the discipline to keep moving forward, even when underestimated. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to have people assume he didn't belong, and instead of breaking him, it hardened his commitment. Every door closed in his face became another reason to keep walking, until one opened. Every doubt cast on his identity became another reason to prove that Americanness wasn't measured by last names or skin tone, but by loyalty, service, and sacrifice. That's why the insult cut so deep. Not because it was new, he had heard versions of it before, but because of where it landed. In a room meant to be about ideas, in a country still wrestling with its divisions, here was a reminder that no matter how much he gave, no matter how much he sacrificed, there would always be someone ready to tell him he didn't belong. But Patel didn't rise through outrage. He didn't let bitterness define him. His journey had been about something bigger than himself. He believed in the idea of America, not the perfect, polished myth, but the messy, flawed, struggling promise that if you worked, if you contributed, if you served, this country could be home. And when you believe in that kind of America, you don't answer insults with fury. You answer them with dignity. That was Patel's power. He didn't need to shout to be heard. His composure, his calm, his steadiness under fire, that was what made people listen. Because in him, people didn't just see one man. They saw the resilience of millions who had walked similar paths. They saw their own parents, their own struggles, their own fight for belonging. And in that moment on stage, as the insult hung heavy in the air, Patel wasn't just defending himself. He was carrying the stories of every immigrant family that had ever been told they weren't enough. He was representing the quiet, invisible army of Americans who proved their loyalty not with words, but with hard work and sacrifice. This wasn't about personal pride. It was about principle. And Patel understood that better than anyone. So when he paused, when he steadied himself in the face of arrogance, it wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. Every chapter of his life, the immigrant roots, the family sacrifices, the long hours of study, the years of service, had been leading to this exact point. This was the moment all those years of resilience prepared him for. The insult still lingered in the air, sharp and poisonous, when the crowd reacted. Gasps rippled across the hall. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward, phones in hand, eager to capture every second. A low murmur spread like wildfire. Half outrage, half anticipation. Caroline Levitt leaned into the silence she had created. She smirked, savoring the moment, convinced she had landed a decisive blow. She crossed her arms, tilting her head as though daring Cash Patel to challenge her. To her, this was entertainment, a performance, another viral clip in the making, and for a few seconds it seemed like she had succeeded. The weight of her words pressed down on the room. Tension clawed at the air. The insult wasn't just an attack on Patel's heritage, It was a reminder of a wound etched deep into America's conscience, one that millions had felt in classrooms, in workplaces, in neighborhoods. But Patel didn't rise to take the bait. He didn't snap back, didn't let anger spill from his lips. Instead, he paused. The silence was heavy, unbearable. His eyes held steady, his expression calm, though beneath the surface the stakes could not have been higher. He stood like a man rooted in something deeper than insult, deeper than arrogance. He stood as though anchored by dignity itself. Levitt mistook the pause for weakness. She doubled down. "You heard me," she sneered, her voice carrying across the room. "If you're so proud of your roots, maybe you should live there instead of pretending to represent America here." The crowd erupted again. Some booed, others gasped louder, while a cluster of her supporters clapped, egging her on. It was chaos, an atmosphere she thrived in, one she thought Patel could not withstand. But still, Patel did not react. He remained motionless, a figure of stillness in the storm. His silence began to shift the room. What had first seemed like hesitation now felt like power. The longer he held it, the more people leaned forward, waiting. The stillness became suspense, and suspense became control. Leavitt's smirk faltered for the first time. The arrogance that had fueled her confidence now looked shaky, desperate, as if she realized the energy of the room was no longer hers to command. Patel finally lifted his chin. His eyes swept across the audience, meeting not just Levitt's glare but the faces of everyone watching, the doubtful, the hopeful, the outraged, the inspired. In that single glance he seemed to be speaking without words. "I hear you. I see you. And I will not be broken." The whispers stopped. Phones steadied. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. It was the kind of silence that demanded an answer, not from Levitt but from Patel. And then, with a quiet strength, Patel began to speak. Patel drew in a steady breath, the pause stretching just long enough to command the room. When his voice finally broke the silence, it wasn't loud or theatrical. It was calm, clear. Every word carried the weight of conviction. "You tell me to go back to India," he began, his eyes never leaving Levitt's. "But let me remind you, I was born here. I was raised here. I was educated here, and every single step of my career, every hour I've worked in service to this nation has been here. This is my country, just as much as it is yours." The crowd stirred, the tension shifting. What moments before had felt like dominance from Levitt now felt like overreach. Patel continued, his tone unshaken. "You see, that phrase, 'go back where you came from,' it isn't new. Generations of immigrants have heard it. The Irish heard it. The Italians heard it. Jewish families heard it. And now people like me hear it too. But history tells us something important. Every group that was told they didn't belong went on to help build this country stronger than before. Because America isn't weakened by immigrants, it's defined by them." A murmur of approval spread through the crowd. Levitt's smirk wavered, her eyes darting nervously as she realized Patel wasn't folding. He was building momentum. Patel pressed on. "My parents came to this nation with nothing but hope. They worked jobs most people overlook. They saved every dollar they could, sacrificed everything they knew just so their children could live a life worthy of America's promise. And when I had the chance to serve this country, I did it. Not because it was easy, not because it was comfortable, but because I believe in the ideals that make this place worth defending." The hall grew still again. Every sentence was hitting harder now, not just as a rebuttal but as a declaration. This wasn't about Levitt anymore. It was about the meaning of Americanness itself. Patel straightened, his voice firming with pride. "I've stood in rooms where national security decisions were made. I've carried the responsibility of protecting our citizens, our freedoms, our future. That's not pretending to represent America. That is representing America. And no insult, no matter how sharp, can erase that record of service." The audience broke into scattered applause, hesitant at first, then swelling as more and more joined in. Levitt shifted in her chair, the confidence draining from her posture. The smile that had once beamed with arrogance now flickered into unease. Patel didn't stop. He lifted his hand gently, quieting the claps. His tone softened, but the steel remained. "You see, patriotism isn't about where your grandparents were born. It isn't about the color of your skin or the name you carry. Patriotism is about what you give to this country. It's about sacrifice, service, loyalty, and love of the values that bind us together. That's what makes us American. Not ancestry, but commitment. A wave of nods spread through the crowd. Some looked visibly moved. Phones that had been raised to mock now streamed a moment of dignity, a moment that was destined to be replayed across millions of screens. Patel leaned in slightly, his words sharpening like the final stroke of a blade. So when you tell me to go back to India, you reveal more about yourself than about me, because I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to prove anything. I am already home. This is my America. The silence that followed was deafening. For a breathless instant, the room was frozen. Then the applause came, not hesitant this time, but thunderous, sweeping through the hall with force. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, their voices rising in approval of not just Patel's words, but the dignity behind them. Leavitt's face flushed. She shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping, her hands tightening around her notes. The smirk was gone. In its place was the unmistakable look of someone who realized the spotlight she had tried to control was no longer hers. Patel stood steady, his composure unbroken. He didn't gloat. He didn't rub salt in the wound. He simply let the words hang there, letting the audience, the cameras, the nation absorb the message. Because in that instant, the battle had been won, not with an insult, not with arrogance, but with truth delivered in dignity. And as the crowd's roar echoed, one truth was undeniable. Patel hadn't just silenced his opponent. He had reframed the conversation, turning an insult meant to diminish him into a declaration that lifted millions. But the power of that moment wouldn't end in that room. Because what followed across social media, across news cycles, across the cultural landscape, would transform a single exchange into something far larger. Something no one watching that night could have predicted. The debate ended, but the story had only just begun. Within minutes, Patel's words were clipped, captioned, and shared across social media platforms with the velocity of lightning. The insult had been shocking, but the response, calm and devastatingly dignified, was what caught fire. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. This is my America. Patel McDrop. Dignity over hate. Clips of his line, I don't need to go back to India. I'm already home. This is my America, spread faster than anyone could track. Within hours, the moment had racked up millions of views. Comment sections overflowed with gratitude, with outrage at the insult, with pride at the response. Memes sprang up overnight. One image showed Patel standing tall, the words, "This is my America," emblazoned in bold across the frame. Another contrasted Leavitt's smirk with Patel's composure, arrogance versus dignity. TikTok edits layered swelling music under his speech, turning a debate clip into something resembling a movie trailer. The internet, for once, seemed to agree. This was a moment worth remembering. Journalists picked up the story, framing it as more than just a heated exchange. Headlines read, Kash Patel turns, insult into viral declaration of belonging, and Leavitt's smear backfires as Patel defines patriotism on his terms. Editorials praised the speech as a rare display of grace in an era too often dominated by shouting matches and division. Even commentators who rarely agreed with Patel or Nye politics found themselves acknowledging the power of the moment. One cable anchor remarked, "You don't have to agree with Patel's ideology to recognize the strength of that answer." That was American in the purest sense. Celebrities joined the chorus. An actor tweeted, "That clip gave me chills. This is the America I believe in." A Grammy-winning musician reposted the video with the caption, "Dignity is louder than hate." Even sports figures chimed in. An NFL player quoted the line and added, "Say it louder for the people in the back." The ripple effects reached unexpected places. Rival politicians, usually eager to score partisan points, admitted Patel had struck a chord. One wrote, "In a moment of insult, Kash Patel reminded us what patriotism really is." Another from across the aisle conceded, "That response will be studied in debate prep for years." Meanwhile, Leavitt's camp struggled to regain footing. Her team attempted to spin the exchange as humor, as just a joke, but the damage was already done. The clip of her smirking while hurling the insult had been etched into the public consciousness. Side by side with Patel's steady rebuttal, her arrogance only looked smaller, pettier, more out of touch. In living rooms across America, families replayed the moment. Immigrant parents showed their children Patel's words as proof that dignity can stand tall against hate. Students shared the clip in group chats, marveling at how calmly he had dismantled bigotry without sinking to its level. Teachers referenced it in classrooms as an example of courage in civic discourse, and yet the true impact wasn't just measured in likes, shares, or retweets. It wasn't just in headlines or trending hashtags. The real resonance was quieter, deeper, harder to measure. It was in the immigrant mother who whispered yes under her breath when she heard him say, "This is my America." It was in the teenager who had felt out of place at school, but suddenly saw someone standing tall on a national stage with the same skin tone, the same story. It was in every American who had ever been told they weren't enough and now had words to push back. The digital wave was undeniable, but the cultural echo was even greater, because in a single exchange, Patel had reframed what it meant to belong. He had taken an insult designed to exclude and turned it into a declaration that included millions. But the true impact of this moment wasn't just online, it was cultural. Moments like these rarely linger in the national imagination. But Patel's words did, because they spoke to something larger than politics, larger than party lines. They crystallized a truth that too often gets buried in the noise. America is not about where your grandparents were born, but about what you are willing to give, to build, to defend, and to dream. The insult had been sharp and ugly, meant to shrink him. Yet Patel's answer transformed it into a mirror, one that forced the nation to ask itself, who truly embodies America? The one who sneers or the one who serves? The one who belittles or the one who builds? This is where the lesson emerged. Dignity is greater than hate. Service is greater than ancestry. Americanness is greater than division. These weren't just words on a page or slogans on a banner. They were lived truths, carved into Patel's story, and echoed in the millions who saw themselves reflected in him. In reframing the attack, Patel reminded America that patriotism isn't loud chest-thumping or cheap insults hurled across a stage. It's quiet endurance. It's the immigrant father working double shifts so his child can wear a cap and gown. It's the soldier who salutes the flag not because of where his family came from, but because of what that flag represents: freedom, opportunity, belonging. Patel's story reminded people that Americanness is not fragile, not something you can lose with a single insult. It is resilient, woven through generations of sacrifice and hope. The attempt to dismiss him only proved how strong his roots truly were, roots nourished by both his heritage and his loyalty to the nation that had embraced it. Across the country, the moment became a rallying cry for those who had ever been told to go back. It wasn't just about Patel anymore. It was about the millions of people who knew that phrase all too well. He had answered it for all of them. His dignity had carried theirs, and in doing so, Patel became something more than a debater on a stage. He became a symbol that when arrogance tries to diminish, dignity can rise higher. A symbol that hate may roar for a moment, but dignity endures across generations. That is why his response mattered. Not just because it silenced a room, not just because it went viral, but because it reminded America of its better self. It recalled the idea that this country's greatness is not measured by exclusion but by inclusion. Not by where we draw borders, but by how we open doors. As the noise of politics continues, Patel's words remain, echoing in the places where they matter most, in classrooms, in homes, in the hearts of people who dare to believe that America is big enough, strong enough, and good enough to belong to us all. And that is the moral of this story. That in the face of hate, you do not need to shout louder. You only need to stand taller. Because when hate tries to divide us, dignity reminds us who we truly are. Caroline Leavitt's insult was meant to humiliate, to strip dignity away with 4 careless words, "Go back to India." But in the end, it wasn't Patel who was diminished. It was Leavitt. Because Patel turned that insult into a declaration of belonging, a statement of strength. A reminder that Americanness is not granted by the arrogant, it is lived by the dignified. And that is why his response shocked America. Not with volume, not with venom, but with calm, unwavering truth. I don't need to go back to India. I'm already home. This is my America. That single line turned a moment of hate into a victory for dignity. It silenced the room, electrified the nation, and gave voice to millions who have heard that same insult in their own lives. Patel's composure reminded us that hate is fleeting, but dignity endures. But here's the truth. This story doesn't end with Kash Patel. It doesn't end with one debate stage or one viral clip. The story continues with us, with everyone who chooses to stand taller instead of lashing out, to lead with pride instead of bitterness, to see America not as a weapon to divide, but as a home to share. So if Patel's words moved you, if you believe in dignity over hate, then don't let this moment fade. Share this video, subscribe to this channel. Be part of spreading a message that America desperately needs to hear, that belonging is not up for debate, and that dignity is the truest form of power. Because the story doesn't end here. It continues with us.